This is Dr. Blake Jones, and thank you for joining us today on the Guided Podcast. Joined today by my friend, Dr. Melinda Moore from Eastern Kentucky University. Melinda, it's so good to see you.
Oh, it's great to see you.
Yeah, always great talking with you. And some of the conversations we have are difficult. They're around a difficult topic that you've kind of devoted your life to, and that is suicide prevention and postvention. And I want to talk with you a little bit about that, and specifically your work with faith communities. That's why you came on today, and that's such an important piece of work that you're doing in such an important community that you're serving by doing that. But I wonder if we could talk a little bit just about your personal journey into this work. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, this is very much a personal journey for me, but how gratifying that I've been able to use a personal experience in such for me, a profoundly, great way in my profession. So it's hard to believe, but it will be 30 years next May when my husband, Connor, we were newly married. He was a graduate student at The Ohio State University. He was getting a PhD in organic chemistry. I met him because I had gone back to school. I was planning on some sort of career in healthcare. I was working for the governor of Ohio and working in doing a lot of public policy stuff, mainly a speechwriter for the Ohio Department of Health. But I was really interested in being on the clinical end of healthcare. And he was going to Ohio State, but he was from Ireland. And he, 8 months into our marriage, killed himself. And it was a total shock and surprise to me. For sure, the most deeply painful experience of my life. And I'd had some other pretty painful experiences before that. But it also tore off the blinders on my eyes to the suffering around suicide, suicidal thinking, and to the problem of suicide. And, I was a speechwriter for the director of health. I was writing speeches about every cause of morbidity and mortality, in Ohio, low birth weight babies, smoking cessation, cancer clusters, all these behavior-related causes, but we weren't talking about suicide. And when I came back from burying him in Ireland, the only people that would really talk to me, because people really were just avoiding me like the plague. It was like it was catching.
Right.
And that's when I realized the stigma around suicide was so significant. And this was a problem to people getting support in the aftermath of these events, but also getting help. Prior and when they're in crisis. And so about 1,200 Ohioans were killing themselves every year. So that really kind of ticked me off that we weren't talking about it. We were talking about all these other things. And so it took me a couple of years. I got my sea legs, and then I really pivoted to suicide prevention. And that had been my home for a while, but then I really wanted to be on the clinical end. And I started working for an organization in Northern Virginia called the Kristen Brooks Hope Center, which was the administrative offices of 1-800-SUICIDE. And I had a meeting with Dr. David Jobs at Catholic University of America. And he said, hey, why don't you come and get a master's degree in psychology and maybe get a PhD? And that's what happened with me. And so I'm deeply grateful, for that experience of loss. Because it did open my eyes. I hated that my husband had to die, but it changed me. And I neglected to say that I was, at the time we got married, I was a new Catholic and was really recommitted myself to God. I came from a family of faith, but this was something that I wanted to do. And I could not understand why God would allow this to happen to Connor, why God would allow this to happen to me. So it really challenged my faith. And at the time I thought, my faith community is not really prepared to address my suffering, but this is something I want to do at some point in time in my life. I want to get involved in helping people within the context of faith.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Your faith community back then, were they helpful at all? Not helpful? What did they do? How did they respond to this terrible thing that happened?
Yeah, so they just weren't equipped.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a new Catholic. I was going to this wonderful church in downtown Columbus, Ohio, St. Patrick's. It's run by Dominicans, basically. So they're wonderful preachers, and I wasn't going to stop going there. I love that church, but they just weren't equipped to really address what I was experiencing. So I did seek help from outside my faith community, other people, Christians who were outside my faith community who were supportive. But this was the dark ages of suicide prevention, and so we didn't really have broad suicide support groups. We didn't even have a 1-800 suicide prevention hotline number at the time. So we really weren't talking about it publicly. We didn't have resources available. So I kind of went it alone for a really long time until I got involved in suicide prevention and then got involved nationally with suicide prevention and then started meeting other people like myself who were suicide bereaved. So I would say that I wandered in the desert for a really long time.
Yeah, and I had the same experience as you, as growing up in a Christian home, and experiencing people around that had suicide loss, and it was I remember some pastors talking about it as if it were a sin, or that the person had gone to hell because of what they had done, and so. And that's heartbreaking, and I wonder if you could talk about some of the myths or the things that are talked about in faith communities that you've had to kind of struggle against and educate about.
Yeah. So I was so lucky, early in my career to be mentored by Dr. Jim Clemens. He wrote a seminal book 35 years ago called What the Bible Says About Suicide. And, he, in this book, he was a Wesley Theological Seminary professor in Washington, D.C. That's how I met him. But in the book, it really outlines the Bible says very little about suicide. But the problem is that maybe not a problem, I don't know. Some of our early church fathers kind of took it upon themselves to codify suicide as a sin. So St. Augustine, wrote pretty early, that he likened it to, thou shalt not kill from the Ten Commandments. And then St. Thomas Aquinas, really kind of put the nail in the coffin in terms of suicide being an absolutely unforgivable sin.
Yeah.
And then that was kind of carried forth. But, with Vatican II and then the Catechism, we really understand, at least within the Catholic Church, and this is usually pretty consistent with other faith communities, it's considered really a result of a psychological disturbance, grave psychological disturbance that mitigates the responsibility of the individual. Now, we're not going to endorse suicide, obviously, but it's not considered the unforgivable sin. Life is a gift from God. We are stewards of that, but they also recognize that there is a science around how we understand mental health challenges and suicidal ideation, and that should kind of temper our thinking about this. So I think most faith communities really understand that, but the problem is it doesn't seem like a lot of pastors, a lot of clergy, a lot of priests have gotten the memo on this. So I think we have a big job in educating faith leaders, but then also people in faith communities who are doing ministries involved in stewardship, to understand that this is actually something we need to be ministering to, as opposed to condemning and running away from and continuing to stay silent about.
Yeah. I'll give a quick shout out to a local minister that I know about. I do a lot of work with first responders, and sadly, an officer killed himself last year, and his funeral was at a local church here, and there were hundreds of his friends there and colleagues, and the pastor got up and said very, very clearly to them, he talked about how he died. There was no, we're not sure. It's like, yes, he killed himself sadly. He is in the arms of Jesus right now, and he was very clear about that. And I just loved that. And that was a very powerful thing. He's a very well-known pastor of a very large church here in central Kentucky. And he was very clear about that to those other officers. And I really respect that. So it feels like pastors and faith leaders have a special kind of platform where they can bring about some healing and education around suicide. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they can demonstrate leadership in those moments when people need leaders. How do they think about this? How do you respond? How do you help the bereaved who are left behind? And so they're in a very powerful position. They kind of don't know it, but it sounds like this pastor really understood that he had an opportunity to demonstrate leadership. How we talk about it, the words, the language that we use, the theology that we assert. I think there's an awful lot that can be done in that moment, and it's crucial. But again, not every faith leader understands that or understands how to think about it. And oftentimes, if they didn't go to seminary, or even if they went to seminary, they probably got very little information about this. So they really bring their own personal experiences to the table when it comes particularly to suicide. And suicide is unlike any other cause of death. I mean, it's got all sorts of things that comes with it, and understanding not only the person who struggled and took their own life, but also and where they are, but also how to help those individuals who are left behind, because there are crucial suffering, crucial journeys that are left behind that they can really help minister to, alleviate suffering, but also help people. And I would say that I was, in spite of the lack of support, really institutional support from my faith community, faith can be an incredible tool in your recovery, but also in your personal growth, your spiritual growth. And so I think there's opportunities to really, use that time to do so much more than just hold the funeral, honor the person who's died.
Yeah. Yeah. And those leaders are often looked to, as you said, in times of crisis, that people listen and they really take to heart what they say. And so that's such a powerful thing to think about. So let's talk about, my hope is that a lot of faith leaders will watch this podcast. What are some basic things that they can do, maybe largely around mental health, but specifically around suicide prevention? And then if sadly someone dies of suicide, what can they do about that or after that?
Yeah. So there seems to be, and I think this has been around for a while. I mean, I know that a lot of Protestant churches have, for a much longer period of time, have had mental health ministries. But I've been involved in founding a mental health ministry within the Diocese of Lexington. We're housed currently at the Cathedral of Christ the King. But Bishop John Stowe has been just such an ally in our work over the last 5 or 6 years, and then permitted the establishment of this mental health ministry. But this has been going on, like I said, I think in other churches throughout the country. But it's really, this effort within the Catholic Church has really been led by 2 faith leaders, Deacon Ed Schoner and Bishop John Dolan of the Diocese of Phoenix. Both lost survivors. They lost family members. Deacon Ed lost his daughter Katie to suicide, and they founded this organization called the International Association of Catholic Mental Health Ministers. And what they've done is they've created a template for what parishes and dioceses throughout the world can do, and they've really become leaders. And in fact, in November of 2025, the Pope Leo established November in his prayer intentions for suicide prevention. So they're really institutionalizing it also within the church itself. So I think there's an opportunity to, really engage faith leaders around this important, issue that's really impacting all of us, in the United States, also internationally, but then also to have events. I mean, whether it's preaching about suicide from the pulpit or mental health issues from the pulpit, establishing that, God made us as a whole human being, and not just our body, but also our mind. And, he wants us to be healthy. And so I think, advocating for people to take care of their mental health and then to address people in the community who are really struggling with mental health challenges or who are supporting loved ones with mental health challenges, whether that's creating a support group within this mental health ministry or just having information in the bulletin. There's lots of things that churches can do. They can do a little bit, they can do a lot. I run a Survivors of Suicide group, a monthly group, and I co-facilitate it with a priest within the Diocese of Lexington. I think it's important for people to see clergy in this position, to know that they care deeply, not just about their spiritual needs, but also their mental health needs.
Yeah. Yeah. In some areas, there's just such a stigma around mental health. And, the whole thing of if you pray hard enough, that's really all you need. And I think that's a dangerous message. I mean, I'm for prayer. I'm a Christian myself. I believe in that, the power of prayer, but also believe in addressing these things head on, and providing mental health interventions for people that are struggling, and that may feel like they can't reach out, that they feel shamed by that. You know? And shame often goes with suicidal behavior, right? And just that sense of hopelessness and that they can't get out of it.
Oh, absolutely. So there's a new science around suicide. We understand suicide, how people become suicidal. We understand the suicidal mind so much better. We can assess, we can intervene, we can treat it, but it's a pretty new science. And so understanding, that suicidal thinking is really about feeling disconnected. It's almost like you're looking through at the world through a fractured lens. You see yourself as a burden, and you don't want to be a further burden by asking for help. And I think this is particularly problematic with men. That's why we've got a problem with suicide in the United States among primarily men. And so I think we have to really get messages out in culture and faith communities, about help seeking, but understanding that these people who are in crisis, just they are not thinking clearly about what they're experiencing. So we have to really be a safe harbor and have messages out there saying, look, if you're having these thoughts, we would like to know. Or if you are a family member of somebody who's chronically suicidal, saying, we understand that this is really hard on the whole family. We want to be a support to you. We want to provide you with a place where you belong, where we can befriend you, where we can accompany you. And then we can also provide you spiritual support, if you would like that as well, because it's not just about providing information, resources, possibly referrals to mental health professionals, but also the spiritual support, praying together, and having people in this community that will provide that kind of support. But to say, if you just love Jesus more, that's not helpful.
Yeah.
Or if you just pray more, that's not helpful.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when we think about the faith leaders, and I know of them, both Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, across the spectrum, that have killed themselves, and those were individuals who had committed themselves fully to God. And these were people who prayed all the time. And there are many, many Christians, people sitting in the pews every Sunday or Saturday, who are very committed. So I think we have to understand, what is considered a mental health challenge, and then what is considered more of a spiritual challenge, and recognize the lanes that we're in, and not confuse the two.
Yeah, that's good. I do want to talk with you a little bit about your postvention work. I've had numerous clients that have come to me, even this past year, and they've experienced suicide, and they're like, I really don't know what I would have done had I not run into Melinda Moore. And she just, her work in my life was absolutely amazing at the hardest time in my life. And so I think I've told you that. I hope I have, but I want you to know that, and that you're beloved by those people that you've helped so much. But we have a lot of therapists that watch this podcast. And so what do people who have experienced a suicide in their family or with a friend, what do they need after that?
Goodness. Well, I think it's important that if you know somebody who's had a suicide loss, it's different. Suicide's different than other causes of death. But I think treating them like you would if their loved one died from cancer or a car accident or something else, just not avoiding, reaching out. But I think also checking in with them and letting them know, I'm here, I love you, I care, I'm here to listen, and just listening. They need accompaniment, whether it's inside a faith community or outside a faith community. And I think also getting information. We're lucky in Kentucky because we have some real, experts in Kentucky. Dr. Julie Searle at the University of Kentucky, she pioneered the science around exposure and impact of suicide loss. We know that the exposure is much greater. About 135 people are exposed for every person who dies by suicide. But about 48 of those 135 feel close or very close. And it's that closeness that predicts the impact. And we know that individuals who feel close or highly close usually have higher levels of depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. Also, they attempt suicide. So it's like suicide begets suicide. So we have to understand that those individuals who are left behind, they themselves may be now at a unique risk for these mental health concerns, but also suicide itself. So I think we have to really kind of wrap our arms around them, give them space, but tell them, look, we're here. And I'm going to help you in any way I can, but also inform yourself. There are organizations, the American Association of Suicidology, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. In Kentucky, we have very robust postvention resources with the state of Kentucky. And so I think just Googling it
Yeah.
and seeing what you can do as somebody who cares about somebody who's lost a loved one to suicide.
Yeah. Talk with me about, sometimes I have people who are angry at God, and they're ashamed of that. They think they shouldn't be. Somewhere along their line, someone has told them that that's not okay to be angry with God, and they are, and so they bring that up, and my response is always, God is big enough to handle your anger, and it's really okay. But what do you do, especially with someone who is in a faith community that has experienced suicide loss, and they just have that intense anger toward God, or toward their just questioning their own faith, or what do you do with those feelings that person brings up?
Again, this is a wonderful opportunity to accompany and to listen and to give permission to be disappointed, to be angry, to rail, to wrestle with your relationship with God. I cannot think of anybody who is either suicide bereaved or bereaved from any other cause who has not expressed to me their disappointment with God. And I think it's important for them to feel those feelings and to explore. Again, I did this. I certainly did this myself in the aftermath. I was a new Catholic and had committed myself. And even though it took me a while, I did find a priest, because I could not find a priest who, in the aftermath of my husband's death, who would help me understand this experience of loss within the context of my faith. Finally, because of introduction by a friend, I met Father Bill Maroon, who sat with me, cried with me. He restoried Job with me, and he allowed me to kind of sink into my disappointment. But in that permission and in that wrestling with it, I was then able to reconcile myself, kind of accept the mystery of what had happened, recognizing that God was there with us all along. Jesus was with Connor when he killed himself. Yeah, and with me.
Yeah. Wow, that's powerful. It's very powerful. Talk with me a little bit about maybe some practical things that people can do right after the suicide. Like, I've worked with a few people who've experienced this, and they describe, it's just hard for me to just even get up out of bed, and like my world is gone. I can't work. I can't eat. I can't do anything other than think about this person, maybe think about the way that they died. Those images keep playing in my mind, and just the grief is just this wave that overwhelms them. And so what are just some practical things that people can do to sort of get back just even into life?
Yeah. I think you have to be really intentional about self-care. I tell people when I see them and they're, in the immediate aftermath of these events, I don't try to do therapy with them. I listen.
Because they can't process.
No, they can't.
Much.
And it would be counterproductive.
Yeah.
And also they need to really just be heard. They need to get it out. They need to tell somebody. They need to have a safe place. So I think finding those safe places, those people that can support you, that can listen, just listen, but also, being very intentional about your own self-care. It's eating, making sure you're exercising. I always encourage people to go to the doctor. Tell your doctor what happened, because your doctor, you might need something for sleep. You might need something, for mood. This could send you into a full-blown, clinical depression, so you might need those things, and to take those things to, and to really be intentional and just very taking baby steps, getting out of bed, taking a shower, going to work. I think work is therapeutic. A lot of people want to take a lot of time off in the aftermath of these events. I think it's important to take time off, but I do believe that you don't just feel better automatically one day and then decide you want to go back to work. I think work can be incredibly therapeutic and helpful. It's a reason for getting out of bed, but then also for kind of getting back into the rhythms of life, because this is not a loss that will go away after 3 days or 3 months. It will be with you for the rest of your life as you process, but also other things that occur. And I'm acutely aware of the potential for what we call post-traumatic growth in the aftermath of these events. And this can happen professionally. It certainly happened for me.
Yeah.
Opened my eyes. My career today is not the product of my post-traumatic growth. It was actually the opening of my eyes. And also my spiritual kind of breaking open. The fact that I became closer with God, personal strength, relating to others, appreciating life every day. These are things that are also possible in the aftermath. Not in the immediate aftermath, but there's hope. That life will not always be miserable and so difficult, and your suffering will lessen. You'll never forget the individual. In fact, you may even have a new relationship with them. But your life will be changed forever.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to end it on the hope piece, because that's what I always want to leave people with. And I just so appreciate your work and your friendship, and just thank you for the lives that you've touched, and for using your own life and your own pain to impact so many people. Really appreciate you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, this has been Dr. Blake Jones on the Guided Podcast. I hope you will take good care along the journey.